Hello everybody, my name is Zeke. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the 8 or 9 books that were my favorite books that I read this year. I don't really have a particular order. I'm not even going to do it in the order I read them. I'm kind of just going to do it randomly. The more I think about the books that I have this year, there's a lot of variety there. There's lots of different genres, lots of different lengths, some new, some old. And also, just in general, this year was very successful. There's a lot of books that I read that I'm not going to talk about that I still really enjoyed. And I'm just really glad. I feel like I branched out a lot more in my reading this year. I read a lot of things that I've been wanting to read for a while, and also a lot of things that I had never heard of or heard very little about. The first book I want to talk about I read very early on in the year, and it's remained one of my favorite books, and that's Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor. This is a very dark book, and I was greatly disturbed by it because it's a very disturbing book. In this book, we're following this really terrifying setting of this town/village where a murder is committed, and we're following, we switch a lot of perspectives. I don't think, I could be wrong, it's been a while, but we don't really go back to any of the perspectives once we're in their heads for a little while. So we're really just switching from one unreliable narrator to the next unreliable narrator to the next unreliable narrator, and we're uncovering some half-truths, some real things that happened, and we're kind of building this confusing and convoluted but also really violent and really disturbing tale of everything that happened surrounding this death. And we uncover more about these characters. They're really unlikable characters for the most part, if not all of them. They're all deeply flawed, and some of them are just really hateable. But I feel like the big standout of this book is the writing, and it is a lot to get into because the writing is not very accessible. It's very wordy, it's very lengthy. We have really long sentences, and it's a lot to take in, and you really have to read it slowly. The way it's constructed, the way it's told is really absorbing and really sucks you in, and even though it's really disturbing to read, you can't really look away. And I just really incredibly enjoyed it, and I really want to reread it, kind of. I'm a little bit hesitant because I need to be in a place where I'm okay with being incredibly disturbed again, but this just had such an impact on me when I read it that I think this is the most emotional response I've had to a book this year, and I definitely want to reread it sometime in my future. But definitely be very aware. If you can think of a bad thing that happens in the real world, it happens in this book. So take it with a grain of salt, but it's incredible if you do decide to read it. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is something I've been wanting to read for a while, and so I'm very glad that I finally picked it up, and I knew I was going to love it. And so I'm not surprised that it ended up on this list, but I'm still very happy that it did. This book, if you don't know, is a memoir-ish account of the author's abusive relationship that she was in, but it's not really told like a straightforward memoir at all. The really incredible part of this book is how it's written and how it's structured. We get these really very short chapters, and they all are kind of told with different setups and different context. It's not like a linear story. We're getting glimpses of the author's thoughts retrospectively, mixed with what actually happened, mixed with actual information about abusive relationships and about queer abusive relationships. And she really builds this incredible work of nonfiction that really feels like fiction in a way, but it's so centered around telling the story while also almost educating, and it's a lot to take in, and there's a lot going on, and it's really just well done in the end. I think all the elements that she tries to weave in of the more like actual factual footnotey stuff, that's very limited, but the way that she weaves it into the story she's telling is done in a way that really emphasizes what's going on, what she's talking about in her own life. She uses it to connect with broader ideas, and also the way that she just tells the events. She really infuses it with this horror element that really adds to the emotions you feel reading it, and it's hard to get through because it's obviously a very hard thing to read about, an abusive relationship. But I just think that it's very good at deconstructing everything and walking through it in a way that just adds so much to learning about this topic that's incredibly important. And I think it just is so unique in memoir. Like, I don't read a lot of memoirs, but out of all the memoirs I've ever read, and just I know that this is often praised for this too, but it just is not like any other memoir you've ever read. It barely feels like a memoir while you're reading it, and it covers such an important topic, and it just really rocked my world when I read it. I don't think this is something I can reread because it's a lot, but I think another one that's just really, really well written, well executed, well structured, and I really enjoyed it. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. Going into this, I think with the right mindset is very important. This is a very slow book about a sea expedition gone wrong, but in reality it's about the breakdown of this relationship as this one woman comes back from this sea expedition and comes back to her wife, and something is dramatically wrong. I don't want to get too much into it, but it's a very ambiguous story. It's a very slow story. We don't get a lot of answers, but it's very driven by this relationship, by these characters, by the emotion, by the tone. I think the tone is just very oppressive, and we're following two timelines. We're following the wife under the sea, and then we're following in the future or in the present how they've reunited and are back together, and watching everything go down in real time. It just is so good at building this tone up that is kind of oppressive, and everything feels a little off even though you don't know exactly what's going on, and just making you feel a lot and feel engrossed in it, I think, is the main draw of this book. Once again, it's not very action-packed at all, and I think because I knew that going in, it really helped me enjoy the book. I don't know if I had been expecting something different, if I would have enjoyed it as much, but it's very character-driven, and it's very driven by that tone and by not by answers and not by plot. So if that sounds interesting, it's really good, and I know that I absolutely loved it, and it was everything I wanted and more. And the next book I want to talk about is Another Country by James Baldwin. So this was a book I knew absolutely nothing about when I was going into it, but I just knew that I really wanted to read another James Baldwin book that maybe was a little longer and was going to be very character focused, and that was all I knew about this, and that's exactly what I got, and I absolutely loved it. This is a book that I can't really describe the plot. There's not a lot of plot to speak on. We're basically just following a bunch of characters in New York, in France, but mainly in New York, and the relationships they have, the friendships they have, but then also the romantic relationships that they have. We see them kind of exist, we see them start, we see them end, and we see all the insane tension and awful stuff that happens in this book. There's abuse, there's death, and it's a very wide-ranging story. It's almost, I think, 500 pages to just dissect these character relationships for the most part, but also it does a very important job of talking about the role of race in relationships and also just racism in America at that time. And we also see queer relationships, and it's just a very interesting time capsule, I think, also, despite, like, apart from it just being very good for what it is, it also is very interesting to read about these topics from the perspective of James Baldwin writing in this time period. And I think that all the relationships that we see are very dramatic in how they play out, but they all have a lot to say. And I think, once again, this is a very slow book, and it's very character driven, and you have to really be invested in how these relationships are gonna turn out, and how all these friends and enemies and people who really like and don't like each other are gonna come together. You have to be very interested in all that stuff, But I think that if you are okay with reading a slow book like that, then it really pays off. And also there's something that happens like a fifth or like a quarter of the way through the book that really, I think, sets a lot of things in motion that I don't want to spoil, because even though it is near the beginning, it is a pretty big plot spoiler that really opens a lot of topics of conversation even further. And I just think it's masterfully done, and I'm so glad I picked it up basically on a whim. And I would really recommend it highly. The next book is actually two books because I read them within days of each other, and they are books 2 and 3 of the Neapolitan Quartet by Elena Ferrante. There's the second one, which is The Story of a New Name, and the third one, which is Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay. I could not tell you what happens in which book, because as I said, I got really into the series in the middle of the year, and I read these within like 2 days of each other, so it all kind of just blended together. But these, I read the whole series this year, and these were by far my favorite. Not by far, I really like the fourth one too, and I liked the first one, but these were definitely the standout. Extensively in this series, we're following the relationship of these two girls, Lila and Elena. We're following their childhood as they grew up in Italy, in Naples, and then we see them grow older, we see them branch off, we see them form new relationships, we see them hate each other, we see them have a very weird but also very important relationship with each other, and then we see them grow up into like old age-ish, and it's obviously that's a long time to cover, and there's a lot that happens, and I won't talk specifically about plot details to these two books because it's the middle of the series, but I will say what I really enjoyed about these two books is they really got me very invested, even more so than I was in the first book, because in these books specifically what I liked is we're branching out from the original setting. We're getting a lot more into politics and also the career of one of the characters, and just seeing these characters thrive and then not thrive, and seeing all the emotions they go through and all the tumultuous things that they have to go through, but also the high highs and the low lows. I just feel like you form such a connection with these characters over the course of the series that the relationships and the emotions of the characters themselves just feel so real. And I think that a lot of people praise the relationship between the two main characters in this book. That is incredible. That is the main draw, but also there's so much more to them. And it has the ability to get you invested in like random like town drama, but also wider political conflicts. And I think Elena Ferrante just has such a powerful way of writing characters that feel so real. Like they just feel like people you would meet, super flawed people that you would meet in day-to-day life. And I think that there's nothing else quite like it. I think these are the most like viscerally real characters I've ever read in my life, and it's just going to stick with me for so long. And I'm so glad that I decided to actually continue this series, because I really did like the first book, but I wasn't really getting the whole like why everyone was absolutely in love with this series. And so I kind of picked up the second book on a whim like a few months later, and I'm so glad I did, because it is probably one of my favorite series I've ever read and some of my favorite books I've ever read. So next I want to talk about another memoir. This is Crying in Hmart by Michelle Zauner. I picked this up, it's late, it came out like 2 years ago I think at this point, but I picked this up because I really like the author in her band, Japanese Breakfast, and I knew that this had gotten incredible reviews, and so I was just excited to kind of see what it was all about. And it's once again really hard book to get through. There were a lot of those this year. I kind of picked this up on a whim again, just because I was like, I need to finally read this, and that's not something I should have done, because this absolutely wrecked me. This is a memoir about her mom dying from cancer, so obviously it's a lot to read, but it's also about her relationship with her mom. It's about her relationship with her culture and with her family, and it really just explores her kind of connecting with her mom through this terrible ordeal that they have to go through, and caring for her. And also just we learn a lot about how she feels about this relationship, how she's dealing with her identity. And I just really, it was obviously a lot to read, but I'm very glad I did. And also just now, like, having that context to one of my favorite bands is an added plus. But I think even if you've never listened to their music, I mean, obviously this has done well enough for many people who have never ever heard one of their songs. And I think in its own right, like, really just apart from how much I loved her before, this was just really incredible and deeply personal and heartbreaking, but just very insightful. And I would definitely recommend it, provided you're okay with reading something that is going to be very sad. I would say the best for last. That's a really tough call to make, and I'm not sure if I'm willing to stick with that, but Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. I read this very recently, and it just, I mean, there's so much I can say about this book. I could go on and on about how amazing this book is. We're basically, it's a cult book, I guess, but that really doesn't do it justice. We're following at the start this father and son as they're making a journey in their car away from where they lived after the son's mother died and the wife died, and they are part of this cult thing that worships this weird supernatural being. We jump through timelines, we go back, we learn about the father, and we learn about the cult, and we go forward and we learn more about the son's story and everything that's happening there. And in the middle we get like a news report thing, and it's that structure, first of all, I think is just really well done and really keeps you engaged, and I think really adds to building up the story and building up the themes that she wants to talk about in this book, and which one of the main things is talking about power. It's really about how power corrupts, and that is a very universal theme, a very simple theme. It's a very well covered theme, but it's just done so well in this book. And another side of this book is it's kind of an allegory for the Dirty War in Argentina, which was a time of a lot of murders and disappearances by a dictatorial government, and against political dissidents and other people that they didn't really want around, and using the supernatural as an allegory for that. And also using it all to tell the story of corrupting power, I think is just done so well. And it's a very long book. It's like 600 pages, and the type is not very large. And there's a lot more that goes on in this than I said. And there's a lot of characters that play other roles and who have interesting relationships to read about. And the characters are another thing that I think are pretty well done. I think in a book like this, I don't even need like great characters if the plot's gonna be really engaging, but I found the characters, especially the young characters in this book, were really well written, and I feel like that's hard to do, especially there's a good portion of this book spent on this like group of kids that I thought was very dynamic and I really liked reading. There's nothing else I've ever read quite like this, and it's really incredible, and I will read anything this woman writes because this was absolutely insane and amazing. That's my 2023. Those were my favorite books, and once again, very happy. Read a lot of great stuff this year. I wasn't lying about the variety. We had some memoirs, we had some supernatural, we had some just literary fiction, some horror stuff. I never read horror, so it was just a really good year for me branching out and reading a lot of different books. Hopefully next year will be even better. I have grand plans for next year, or this year at this point, and we'll see how they pan out, but that's for another video. If you liked this video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one.